She wasn't a con artist. She wasn't a gold digger. She wasn't any of the things the headlines would later call her. She was a 23-year-old nursing student who made one desperate decision to save her dying father, and that decision would cost her everything. 3 men, 3 identities, 3 elaborate lies woven so carefully that for 6 months, none of them suspected a thing. And then one night, all 3 of them walked through her door at the same time. But this isn't just a story about a woman who got caught. This is a story about what happens when desperation meets obsession. When lies become prisons. When the men you deceive decide that if they can't have you, no one will. How does a nursing student from a fishing village become the most hated woman in Dubai? How does survival turn into fraud? And how does fraud turn into murder? Tonight, we uncover the chilling truth behind the death of Tala Reyes, a woman who created 3 different versions of herself to keep her family alive, and paid for it with her life. Tala Marie Reyes was born on March 15, 2001, in a small coastal province in the southern Philippines where the fishing boats outnumbered the cars and everyone knew everyone else's business. Her father, Roberto, had spent 40 years pulling nets from the Celebes Sea, his hands permanently calloused, his back permanently bent from decades of labor. Her mother, Elena, sold dried fish at the local market and dreamed of something better for her children. Picture this. While other families in their village worried about the next typhoon season, the Reyes family worried about something else entirely. Education. Elena Reyes believed with an almost religious fervor that education was the only escape from the cycle of poverty that had trapped their family for generations. She saved every peso, skipped meals, mended clothes until they fell apart, all so her daughter could attend the best school in the province. Tala was smart. Not just regular smart. The kind of smart that made teachers stop mid-lesson and stare. By age 12, she was tutoring students 3 years older than her. By 14, she'd won a regional science competition that brought journalists from the capital to interview the fishing village prodigy. Elena Reyes cried that day, standing in their 2-room house with its corrugated tin roof, watching her daughter on television. But here's where Tala's story takes its first dark turn. On November 8, 2015, a massive typhoon made landfall in the southern Philippines with winds exceeding 180 kilometers per hour. The storm's surge reached 6 meters in some areas, swallowing entire neighborhoods in minutes. The Reyes family had evacuated to the local church, which sat on higher ground. But Elena realized she'd left something behind. The metal box under her bed containing 7 years of savings, 12,000 pesos, enough to pay for Tala's high school entrance exams and first semester fees. Without that money, everything she'd sacrificed would mean nothing. Elena Reyes ran back into the storm. Tala watched from the church doorway as her mother disappeared into the horizontal rain. She watched as the water rose around their house. She watched as her father dove into the flood to save his wife. Roberto Reyes survived. Elena did not. They found her body 2 days later, 3 kilometers from their home, still clutching the metal box. The money inside was ruined, worthless. Her mother had died for waterlogged paper. That loss changed everything for Tala. The guilt of knowing her mother died for her education. The weight of carrying her family's dreams alone. The quiet understanding that she could never, ever fail. Because failing would mean her mother died for nothing. For the next 7 years, Tala became a machine of achievement. Top of her class in high school. Perfect scores on her nursing entrance exams. A full scholarship to a prestigious nursing program in Dubai, one of the most respected healthcare education institutions in the Middle East. She was the first person from her village to ever study abroad. The entire community celebrated. Her father, still recovering from the back injury he'd sustained during the rescue, wept with pride. In August 2022, Tala Reyes boarded a plane for the first time in her life. She carried 1 suitcase, her mother's rosary, and the weight of an entire community's expectations. Dubai was everything her village wasn't. Gleaming skyscrapers that touched the clouds. Shopping malls larger than her entire hometown. Wealth so concentrated that people spent more on coffee than her father earned in a week. Tala adapted. She always adapted. She studied 18 hours a day, worked part-time at a medical clinic, and sent money home every month. Her life was exhausting but manageable. Then, in September 2023, she received a phone call that shattered everything. Her father had collapsed at the fish market. The diagnosis was stage 3 kidney disease. Both kidneys were failing. Without dialysis, he would die within months. Without a transplant, he would die within 2 years. The numbers were impossible. Dialysis cost $2,400 per month. The transplant itself would cost $180,000, not including aftercare. Roberto's fishing income had been negligible since his back injury. There was no insurance, no government assistance that covered the full cost, no secret savings hidden away. Tala did the math obsessively. Her scholarship covered tuition only. Her part-time job paid $800 per month. After rent and food and the minimum she needed to survive, she could send home maybe $300. Her father needed 8 times that amount just to stay alive. She applied for loans. Denied. She applied for emergency grants. Denied. She contacted charities, hospitals, government programs, waitlists, paperwork, bureaucratic mazes designed to exhaust people into giving up. And then Marco called. Marco Reyes was Tala's older brother by 3 years. He'd followed their father into fishing until the industry collapsed, then moved to the Gulf region for construction work. He was supposed to be the backup plan, the safety net, the one sending money home while Tala finished her degree. Instead, he was calling to confess that he'd destroyed everything. The conversation happened on October 15, 2023, at 11:47 p.m. Dubai time. Tala remembered every word. "Marco, you're scaring me. What happened? I did something stupid, Tala. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. What did you do?" There was a long pause, the kind of pause that precedes catastrophe. "I owe money. A lot of money. To people who don't forgive debts." "How much?" $45,000. American. Tala's blood turned to ice. That was more than her father's entire treatment would cost. That was more money than their family had seen in 3 generations combined. The story came out in fragments. Marco had started gambling after their mother's death. Small bets at first, a way to feel something other than grief. Then the bets got larger. Then he started losing. Then he borrowed from underground lenders to chase his losses. The interest rate was 15%. Per month, not per year. Per month. By the time Marco confessed, he owed $45,000 in principal and interest. The lenders had given him 60 days to start making payments. "Miss a payment," they'd said, "and we visit your father. The old man with the bad back who lives alone. We hear he can barely walk. Wonder how he'd handle visitors who aren't so friendly." Tala sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the wall, doing math that didn't work no matter how she arranged it. Father's dialysis, $2,400 per month. Marco's interest payments, $6,750 per month. 15% of $45,000. Her income, $800 per month. The gap, $8,350 per month. Every month, forever, or until someone died. She had 2 months before the first payment was due. 2 months to find more money than she could earn in a year. 2 months before loan sharks showed up at her father's door. That night, Tala Reyes made a decision that would eventually kill her. She didn't sleep. She sat at her laptop until sunrise, researching every possible option. Legal options, illegal options, desperate options. And somewhere around 4 a.m., she found herself on a website she'd heard classmates joke about. A dating platform where wealthy men sought companionship from younger women, where the exchange was never explicitly stated but always understood. Tala stared at the profiles. Men who spent more on dinner than her father's monthly dialysis. Men who complained about their sports cars being the wrong color. Men who would never understand what it felt like to choose between medicine and food. She created a profile at 4:47 a.m. She deleted it at 4:52 a.m. She recreated it at 5:15 a.m. If you're following this story, you already know what happens next. But the question that kept investigators up at night wasn't what Tala did. It was who she became. Because over the next 6 months, Tala Reyes wouldn't just date wealthy men for money. She would create 3 entirely different women, each perfectly designed for a different man's fantasy. And each of those men would fall desperately, dangerously in love with the version of her they thought was real. There was Vincent, the 52-year-old Singaporean private banker who wanted a traditional wife. There was Derek, the 34-year-old Singaporean cryptocurrency trader who wanted a party girl. And there was James, the 29-year-old Singaporean architect who wanted an intellectual equal. All 3 were Singaporean expatriates living in Dubai, drawn to the city's tax-free income and luxury lifestyle. None of them knew about the others. None of them knew Tala's real story. And none of them would survive this story unchanged. One of them wouldn't survive at all. Before we meet the three men who would determine Tala's fate, you need to understand something crucial about how she operated. This wasn't amateur hour. This wasn't a young woman stumbling through deception. This was a systematic, researched, meticulously planned operation designed by someone who approached survival the same way she approached her nursing exams. With total commitment and zero room for error, Tala kept a spreadsheet. Investigators found it on her laptop after her death, titled simply Survival XLSX. It contained columns for each man's name, their preferences, their schedules, their communication patterns, and most importantly, their psychological vulnerabilities. She studied these men like case files. She learned what they feared, what they craved, and exactly which version of herself could exploit both. Let's start with the first face. Vincent Tan Wei Leong was 52 years old when he first saw Tala's profile on an exclusive dating service that catered to wealthy professionals seeking meaningful connections. The monthly membership fee was $5,000, which ensured that only serious men with serious money participated. Vincent had serious money. Born and raised in Singapore, he had spent 25 years climbing the ranks of private banking before accepting a position at a major international bank's Dubai branch. He managed portfolios worth hundreds of millions for clients across the Middle East and Southeast Asia. His personal net worth hovered around $15 million. His penthouse overlooked the Marina district. His car cost more than most people's houses. But Vincent also had serious problems. 2 failed marriages back in Singapore. 1 estranged adult daughter who hadn't spoken to him in 6 years. And a growing suspicion that he was fundamentally unlovable. His first wife, Catherine, had left him after 11 years, citing emotional unavailability. His second wife, Mei Lin, had cheated on him after 7 years, claiming he was suffocating and controlling. The same man. 2 opposite complaints. Vincent couldn't understand it. He was successful, wealthy, respected in his industry. Why couldn't he make a marriage work? The answer, which Vincent could never see, was that he didn't want a wife. He wanted a possession. Something beautiful and obedient that would reflect his status and never challenge his authority. His therapist had tried to explain this. Vincent had fired his therapist. When Vincent saw Tala's profile, something stirred in him. She'd listed her interests as family, traditional values, and nursing. Her photos showed her in modest clothing, minimal makeup, a gentle smile. The profile mentioned that she was studying abroad to become a pediatric nurse because she wanted to save children. It mentioned her devout religious faith. It mentioned that she was looking for something serious, not casual. Vincent sent her a message within minutes. Their first date was December 3, 2023, at a 5-star hotel in downtown area, where afternoon tea cost more than Tala's weekly grocery budget. She arrived wearing a high-collared dress, her hair pulled back conservatively, small pearl earrings her only jewelry. When Vincent stood to greet her, she bowed her head slightly before meeting his eyes. She introduced herself as Maria Jean Santos. Not Tala. Maria. The first face, fully in character. Vincent, may I call you Mr. Vincent? Thank you so much for meeting me. I'm a little nervous. I've never done anything like this before. The performance was flawless. Maria spoke softly, almost timidly. She asked Vincent's opinion on every topic before offering her own. She ordered tea instead of alcohol. When Vincent mentioned his work, she listened with what appeared to be genuine fascination, asking questions that showed intelligence but never challenging his expertise. Most young women today only care about parties and Instagram. Vincent said it halfway through their second pot of tea. It's refreshing to meet someone with traditional values. My mother always said that a woman's greatest virtue is loyalty. Maria's voice trembled slightly at the mention of her mother. When you commit to someone, you commit completely. That's what I believe. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was. Maria paused, her eyes glistening. She died when I was 14, in a typhoon. I try to honor her memory every day. That wasn't a lie. It was the truth weaponized. Tala had learned that the most effective deceptions contained kernels of reality. It made the emotions genuine. It made the performance sustainable. By the end of their first date, Vincent was already planning their second. Over the next 5 months, Maria became exactly what Vincent had always wanted. She attended church every Sunday, sometimes texting him photos of herself in modest dresses, rosary in hand. She cooked him traditional Filipino dishes and served them with downcast eyes. She never questioned his decisions, never challenged his opinions, never made him feel anything other than powerful and adored. And she never slept with him. This was strategic. Maria was saving herself for marriage, she explained. Her virginity was a gift she could only give to her husband. Vincent, who had slept with countless women in his life, found himself more attracted to this restraint than to any easy conquest. He started talking about engagement rings by month 3. The money flowed easily. A father's medical emergency required $5,000 in December. A brother's car accident necessitated $8,000 in January. Surgery complications demanded $12,000 in February. Vincent never questioned the requests. He simply transferred the funds, grateful to be needed, pleased to be the provider Maria clearly required. Total extracted from Vincent over 5 months, $60,000. But Vincent's generosity came with a price Tala hadn't anticipated. He began monitoring her obsessively. Safety apps on her phone that tracked her location. Unexpected visits to her apartment. Questions about where she'd been, who she'd seen, why she hadn't answered his call immediately. His love wasn't love at all. It was ownership in disguise. Now let's meet the second face. Derek Chunjin Wei was 34 years old and desperate to prove that he mattered. Born in Singapore to a middle-class family, he'd spent his 20s as an invisible accountant at a mid-tier firm, overlooked by women, dismissed by peers. Then cryptocurrency happened. In 2021, Derek invested his entire savings in a memecoin that went parabolic. Overnight, the invisible accountant became a millionaire. He quit his job, moved to Dubai for the tax benefits and luxury lifestyle, bought a Lamborghini, and reinvented himself as a lifestyle influencer. His Instagram featured yacht parties, bottle service at exclusive clubs, and a rotating cast of beautiful women whose names he rarely remembered. His net worth fluctuated between $3 and $8 million depending on market conditions, but his need for validation remained constant. Every woman on his arm was proof that he'd escaped his former life. Every expensive purchase was evidence that he was finally someone. Tala found Derek at an exclusive nightclub in Marina District on January 12, 2024. She'd researched him for 2 weeks beforehand, memorizing his social media posts, his trading philosophy, his favorite brands. By the time she approached him at the VIP section, she knew exactly who he needed her to be. She introduced herself as Bella Jiang. Not Maria, not Tala, Bella, the second face. Where Maria was demure, Bella was electric. Her dress was designer, purchased with Vincent's money. Her makeup was bold. Her confidence was magnetic. When Derek tried to impress her with his trading stories, she didn't just listen. She challenged him. You actually understand market cap versus fully diluted valuation? Derek couldn't hide his surprise. Most beautiful women he met couldn't explain basic economics. Baby, I made my first 1,000 trading meme coins while my classmates were still figuring out how to open a wallet. Bella laughed, loud and unashamed. Don't let the face fool you. Where have you been all my life? Waiting for someone who could keep up. They spent the night talking about cryptocurrency, trading strategies, and market psychology. Bella matched Derek drink for drink. She danced with abandon. She kissed him in the VIP booth while the bass shook their bodies. By the end of the night, Derek was convinced he'd found his perfect match. Their relationship existed in a different universe than the one Maria shared with Vincent. Where Maria was modest, Bella was provocative. Where Maria attended church, Bella attended after-parties. Where Maria refused physical intimacy, Bella embraced it enthusiastically. The money from Derek came through different mechanisms. Crypto tax issues required $3,000 in February. An investment opportunity she needed to move fast on demanded $10,000 in March. A wallet hack necessitated $15,000 for recovery in April. Derek never questioned these requests either. He lived in a world where money was digital, volatile, and easily replaced. Helping his gorgeous crypto-savvy girlfriend was just part of being the successful man he'd always wanted to be. Total extracted from Derek over 5 months, $58,000. But Derek had one habit that would eventually destroy Tala's carefully constructed world. He tracked everything. Every cryptocurrency transaction, every wallet movement, every peso that left his accounts. It was paranoia born from a 2022 phishing attack that had cost him $50,000 and his sense of security. So when Derek sent Bella money, he didn't just send it. He watched where it went. Now let's meet the third face. And this is where the story becomes truly tragic. James Lim Kai-jun was 29 years old, Cambridge educated, and heartbroken. Born into an upper-middle-class Singaporean family, he'd been groomed for success from childhood. His university girlfriend of 4 years had cheated on him with his roommate, and he'd spent the 3 years since throwing himself into work, too wounded to try again. As a rising architect at one of Dubai's most prestigious international firms, James was designing the city's new cultural center. He believed in buildings that told stories. He believed in spaces that transformed people. And somewhere deep down, he still believed in love, even if he was terrified to pursue it. Tala found James at an art center in Al Quoz on February 8, 2024, at a poetry reading that attracted Dubai's creative elite. She wasn't performing a persona this time. She was something closer to herself. She introduced herself as Tala, her real name. This was either a mistake or a subconscious cry for authenticity that she couldn't suppress. Their first conversation lasted 3 hours. They discussed architecture and poetry, the philosophy of space, the way buildings shape human behavior. Tala asked questions nobody asked. She saw connections nobody saw. James felt, for the first time in years, genuinely understood. My mother used to say that every building tells a story. Tala's voice was soft but certain. Some tell stories of power. Some tell stories of welcome. I think the best buildings tell stories of becoming. James stared at her for a long moment. That's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever said about architecture. Unlike her relationships with Vincent and Derek, Tala's connection with James was slow and genuine. They took walks along the Marina District. They visited galleries in Al Circle Avenue. They debated philosophy over coffee. When James finally kissed her, 3 weeks into their courtship, Tala felt something she hadn't expected to feel. She felt real. The money from James came with guilt that the other extractions didn't carry. His contributions were smaller. $2,000 for her father's medication, $5,000 for her brother's debt collectors, $8,000 for emergency surgery. He gave because he cared, not because he was trying to possess her or prove something. Total extracted from James over 4 months, $32,000. In her diary, recovered after her death, Tala wrote about James differently than the others. March 15, 2024. James held my hand today and told me he loved me. And for 1 second I forgot I was acting. I almost said it back. I almost meant it. That's when I knew I was losing myself. 3 men, 3 faces, $150,000 in 6 months. But the scheme was never sustainable. The lies were getting harder to separate. The identities were bleeding into each other. And somewhere in the digital shadows, Derek was watching transactions that would expose everything. The spreadsheet told a story of desperation that no prosecutor could ignore and no jury could forget. When investigators recovered Tala's laptop from her apartment, they expected to find evidence of greed. What they found instead was evidence of survival so meticulously documented that it read like a war journal. Every peso accounted for, every dollar justified, every transaction linked to a purpose that had nothing to do with luxury and everything to do with keeping people alive. The file was named survival.xlsx, and it contained 17 sheets spanning 6 months of financial choreography that would have impressed forensic accountants at international banks. Tala hadn't just been juggling 3 men. She'd been running a one-woman financial operation more complex than most small businesses. Here's how the money actually flowed. Vincent's contributions, totaling $60,000 over 5 months, went almost entirely to Marco's loan sharks. The interest alone on Marco's $45,000 debt consumed $6,750 every month. Without that payment, men with no patience and less mercy would have visited their father in the Philippines. Vincent's money bought time. Nothing more, nothing less. Derek's $58,000 served a different purpose. A portion went to maintaining the elaborate infrastructure of Tala's triple life. 3 separate phones with different numbers. 3 separate wardrobes appropriate for 3 vastly different personas. Transportation between locations that could never overlap. The cost of being 3 women simultaneously was staggering. But the majority of Derek's money went somewhere investigators didn't expect. it went back to Vincent. Not directly. Tala wasn't stupid. But when Vincent's generosity began to slow around month 4, when he started asking questions about why her family's emergencies never seemed to end, Tala needed to demonstrate independence. She returned several $1,000s of his loans, claiming she'd received help from a distant relative. The money she returned was Derek's. She was using one man's contributions to maintain credibility with another. James's $32,000 went to the most sacred purpose of all, her father's dialysis. Every month, $2,400 left Tala's account and arrived at the provincial hospital in the Philippines, keeping Roberto Reyes connected to the machine that filtered his blood. James's money was the cleanest money. It went exactly where Tala said it would go. Perhaps that's why lying to him felt different than lying to the others. But here's the mathematical horror that Tala faced every night when she updated her spreadsheet. The system only worked as long as all 3 men kept giving. The moment one of them stopped, the entire structure would collapse. She was running a Ponzi scheme of the heart, where each new contribution covered the obligations created by the previous ones, and the only way forward was to keep extracting more. By April 2024, the extraction was getting harder. Vincent had given $60,000 over 5 months. He was growing impatient. "When is your father's situation going to stabilize, Maria?" He asked the question over dinner, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. "I've been more than generous, but I need to understand the timeline." Tala, performing as Maria, lowered her eyes in practiced submission. "The doctors say the transplant could happen within 2 months. Once he has the new kidney, the emergencies will stop. I promise, Vincent. I hate asking you for help. It makes me feel so ashamed." The performance bought her another few weeks. But Vincent was a banker. He understood money flows better than almost anyone. And something about Maria's endless emergencies was starting to feel wrong. Derek's suspicions developed from a different direction entirely. As a cryptocurrency trader, Derek lived in a world of paranoid security. He used hardware wallets. He verified every transaction. He traced every movement of funds with the obsessive attention of someone who had been burned before. When he sent Bella money, he didn't just send it. He watched. The pattern he noticed started small. Every time he sent Bella cryptocurrency, it moved through a series of wallet hops within 48 hours. This wasn't unusual. People moved crypto for privacy all the time. But the final destination was always the same. An off-ramp exchange that converted crypto to local currency. And the bank account that received those conversions showed something interesting when Derek paid a blockchain forensic service to investigate. The same account regularly received transfers from a major Singaporean bank. Premium client transfers. The kind that only came from high-net-worth private banking relationships. Derek didn't know anyone at that bank, but he knew how to find out who did. 3 weeks of digital detective work led him to Vincent Tan's LinkedIn profile. Senior private banker. 25 years experience. Singaporean. Based in Dubai. And, according to his sparse social media presence, recently very happy with a new relationship. The photos Vincent had posted were modest. A dinner here, a concert there. He clearly valued privacy. But in one photo, posted in February, the corner of a woman's hand was visible at the edge of the frame. The hand wore a delicate silver bracelet. Derek had bought Bella that exact bracelet for their 1-month anniversary. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The woman he'd been sleeping with, the woman he'd sent $58,000, the woman he'd bragged about to his friends as proof that he'd finally made it, was also dating a 52-year-old Singaporean banker. And based on the money flows, she was using Derek's funds to pay off debts she'd accumulated from Vincent. His first instinct was rage. His second instinct was investigation. If she was playing 2 men, why not 3? Why not more? James was easier to find than Derek expected. Social media platforms have algorithms designed to surface connections, and Derek had developed skills in digital stalking that served him well in crypto research. Cross-referencing Bella's tagged locations with public event photos from Dubai's art scene, he found a poetry reading where a woman who looked remarkably like Bella appeared in the background of someone's Instagram story. The post was from an architect named James Lim. His caption read simply, "Night of beautiful words and beautiful company." Derek created a fake account and messaged James directly. The message was carefully worded to provoke a response without revealing too much. "Hey, random question. But do you know a woman named Maria? Or maybe Bella? Filipino, about 5 feet 2 inches, really distinctive eyes? James's response came within hours. Her name is Tala. Why are you asking? And just like that, 3 Singaporean strangers became allies in betrayal. The group chat that formed between Vincent, Derek, and James would later become prosecution evidence. But at the time it was simply 3 wounded men trying to understand how they'd all been fooled by the same woman. Vincent wrote first, "I've given her $60,000 over 5 months. She calls herself Maria. Traditional girl. Saving herself for marriage. Wants to be a housewife." Derek responded, "58,000 from me. She calls herself Bella. Party girl. Crypto trader. We've been sleeping together since January." James's message came last, and it carried a weight the others couldn't understand. 32,000. She uses her real name with me. Tala. She's a nursing student. She told me about her sick father. I thought I was falling in love with her. The 3 men had never met. They came from different worlds, different generations, different value systems. But in that moment, they shared something profound. The humiliation of having been completely deceived by someone they trusted. And they shared something else. They were all Singaporeans, far from home, realizing that their compatriot connections meant nothing when it came to matters of the heart. Vincent, predictably, wanted control. He wanted to confront her. He wanted answers. He wanted his money back or he wanted her destroyed. Derek wanted validation. He wanted proof that he hadn't been stupid, that her deception was so sophisticated that anyone would have fallen for it. He wanted to understand the mechanism of his humiliation. James wanted something different. He wanted to know if any of it had been real, if the conversations about architecture and philosophy, if the way she'd held his hand, if the things she'd said about her mother had contained any truth at all. Together they made a plan. They would confront her, all 3 of them, at her real apartment, not the addresses she'd given each of them. Vincent, who had been surveilling Maria for months without her knowledge, knew where she actually lived. A tower in Marina District, Unit 2847, the address she'd never shared with any of them. The date was set for May 4, 2024, 7 o'clock in the evening. They would arrive together. They would demand answers, and they would decide, collectively, what to do with the woman who had made fools of them all. None of them knew that one of them had already decided what that fate would be. The evening of May 4th began like any other evening in Tala Reyes's triple life. She had blocked the night for what she called self-care in her calendar, a code word that meant she would be alone, away from all 3 personas, able to breathe without performing. These nights were rare and precious. She would cook a simple meal, call her father in the Philippines, and try to remember who she was before survival required her to become everyone else. At 6:30 p.m., she was standing in her kitchen, stirring a pot of sinigang, when her phone buzzed. It was a text from James. "Can we talk tonight? Something's been bothering me." Tala frowned. James rarely texted without warning. Their relationship operated on a rhythm of planned encounters, intellectual conversations scheduled like appointments. Spontaneity wasn't his style. "I'm not feeling well tonight. Can it wait until tomorrow?" The response came quickly. "It's important. I'll come to you. What's your address?" The question sent a cold spike through Tala's chest. James didn't know where she lived. None of them knew where she actually lived. She'd given Vincent an address 3 blocks away, Derek an address in beachfront neighborhood, and James believed she lived in student housing near the university. "I'll come to you," she typed back. "Give me an hour." The read receipt appeared immediately, but no response followed. At 6:45 p.m., the doorbell rang. Tala wasn't expecting anyone. The building had a secure entry system. Visitors needed to be buzzed in from the lobby. Only residents could access the elevator without authorization. She approached the door slowly, a strange dread building in her stomach. Through the peephole, she saw a face that shouldn't have been there. James. How had he gotten into the building? How did he know this address? And why did he look like he'd been crying? She opened the door, her mind racing through explanations and excuses. "James, what are you doing here? How did you find me?" But James didn't answer. He just stepped aside. Behind him stood Derek, arms crossed, face carved from stone. And behind Derek, stepping out of the elevator with the calm authority of a man who owned the world, was Vincent. The 3 faces of her survival, standing together in her hallway, staring at her with expressions that ranged from devastation to fury to something far more terrifying. Vincent was smiling. "Hello, Tala." Vincent's voice was pleasant, almost warm. "Or should I call you Maria? Or Bella? We have so much to discuss." The next 60 seconds happened in silence. Tala stepped backward into her apartment. The three men entered, one by one, without asking permission. Derek closed the door behind them with a soft click that sounded like a cell door closing. Vincent claimed the armchair in the living room, the position of authority. Derek sat on the couch, legs spread wide, taking up space. James stood by the window, unable to look at her, staring out at the Marina District lights. Tala remained standing with her back against the wall, trapped in her own home. For 2 full minutes, nobody spoke. The silence was its own form of violence. Finally, Vincent reached into his leather briefcase and withdrew a manila folder. He opened it with the ceremony of a judge delivering a verdict and placed a single sheet of paper on the coffee table. It was a spreadsheet, not her spreadsheet. His own reconstruction, built from bank records, blockchain forensics, and information shared between the three men. Every transaction was listed. Every alias was documented. Every lie was laid bare in columns and rows. $150,000. Vincent's voice was conversational, as if he were discussing a portfolio rebalancing with a client. "That's how much you've extracted from the three of us over 6 months. Impressive, really. The operational sophistication alone is remarkable." Tala's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Please, I can explain." Derek laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Explain what?" "How you were fucking me and telling him you were a virgin." He gestured at Vincent. "How you were playing intellectual soulmate with him while sending me pictures in lingerie." His gesture moved to James. "Which version of you was real, Tala? Any of them?" James finally turned from the window. His eyes were red. "Was any of it true? Your father's illness? Your brother's debt? Or was that just part of the script?" Tala felt something crack inside her. Of all the accusations, this one hurt the most. Because James was the one she'd been closest to honest with. James was the one who'd seen something real. "My father is dying. My brother does owe money to people who will kill him. Every emergency was real. Every medical bill was real. The only thing that wasn't real was me." She retrieved her laptop from the bedroom, opened her spreadsheet, and turned the screen toward them. "Here, look. Every peso I took is documented. Look at where the money went. Father's dialysis. Marco's interest payments. The infrastructure of keeping this lie alive. I didn't buy luxury bags. I didn't take vacations. I didn't keep any of it for myself." The three men examined the spreadsheet in silence. The evidence was overwhelming. This wasn't an apartment of someone living extravagantly on stolen funds. The furniture was cheap. The refrigerator contained instant noodles and eggs. Tala had been funneling every dollar toward people they'd never met, solving problems they couldn't imagine. Derek spoke first, some of the anger draining from his voice. "Why didn't you just ask for help? Like, legitimately? Would you have given me $30,000 if I'd told you the truth?" Tala's laugh was hollow. "Would any of you? I tried every legitimate option. Loans, grants, charities. Nobody helps. Nobody cares. The only way to get money was to make you think you loved me. And the only way to make you think you loved me was to become exactly what each of you needed. So you admit it." Vincent's smile hadn't faded. "You deliberately deceived us. You manufactured emotional connections for financial gain. Under UAE law, that's fraud. Wire fraud specifically. International wire fraud, given where the money went. The sentence is 7 to 15 years. Tala said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Given your visa status," Vincent continued, "you'd serve your sentence in a UAE prison, then be deported. Your father would lose his dialysis funding. Your brother would be at the mercy of loan sharks. Everything you've worked to protect would be destroyed. Is that what you want? What do you want, Vincent?" The question hung in the air. Derek and James exchanged glances. This was the moment they'd discussed in their group chat, but hearing it unfold in person felt different than planning it had. "We've decided to handle this privately." Vincent's voice was silk over steel. "We won't go to the police. We won't contact your university. We won't tell your father what his daughter has become. In exchange, you'll work for us until your debt is repaid." "Work for you?" Tala's voice was flat. Derek needs someone to manage his investor relations. I need a personal assistant with absolute discretion. James has his own requirements. Collectively, you owe us $150,000 plus interest. At a fair salary, that's approximately 5 years of service. James spoke for the first time since his initial question. Vincent, this isn't what we discussed. This feels wrong. Would you prefer she goes to prison, James? Vincent's voice sharpened. Would you prefer her father dies? We're offering her mercy. We're offering her a way to make things right without destroying her life. This isn't mercy. Tala's voice trembled. This is ownership. You want me to spend 5 years as your indentured servant? Living where you tell me to live? Working when you tell me to work? That's not a choice. That's a different kind of prison. Vincent stood from the armchair and walked toward her slowly. He stopped close enough that she could smell his cologne. You created 3 different women to manipulate us. You made us believe in relationships that were manufactured. You stole our money and our trust and our hearts. He reached out and touched her chin, tilting her face toward his. We're simply asking you to keep playing a role. 1 role this time instead of 3. You should be thanking us. Tala pulled away from his touch. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow morning. Vincent returned to the armchair, collected his folder, and moved toward the door. We'll be in touch with the details. Derek followed, pausing at the doorway. For what it's worth, I actually thought we had something real. His voice carried genuine pain beneath the anger. That's the part one can't forgive. James was the last to leave. He stopped at the threshold, still unable to meet her eyes. Tala, if you'd just told me the truth. I know. Her voice broke. You would have helped. I know that now. Then why didn't you trust me? Because trusting people gets you killed. Trusting people gets your mother drowned in a typhoon. Trusting people gets your brother beaten by loan sharks. I trusted the system to help my family, and the system said no. The only person I could trust was myself. And myself wasn't enough, so I became 3 different people instead. James stood in the doorway for a long moment, something unresolved playing across his face. Then he left and Tala was alone. She didn't know that the surveillance cameras Vincent had installed in her building months ago were still recording. She didn't know that Vincent had made a copy of her apartment key during one of Maria's overnight stays at his penthouse. She didn't know that his offer of indentured servitude was never meant to be accepted. Vincent Tan didn't want a servant. He wanted a possession. And possessions that refuse to be owned become problems to be eliminated. Tala began packing a bag at 10:15 p.m. Passport, laptop, her father's medical records, enough clothes for a few days. She didn't know where she would go, but she knew she couldn't stay. The walls of her apartment felt like they were closing in. At 11:42 p.m., she heard a key turn in her lock. She hadn't given anyone a key. The door opened, and Vincent Tan stepped into her apartment for the second time that night. But this time he was alone. And this time he wasn't smiling. Going somewhere. Maria? Vincent Tan Wei Liang had been planning this moment for longer than anyone would ever know. The narrative that emerged during the investigation painted him as a man who snapped under the pressure of betrayal. A wealthy Singaporean banker humiliated by a con artist, driven to violence by wounded pride. The prosecution would argue premeditation, but even they underestimated how deep Vincent's obsession ran. To understand what happened in Tala's apartment on the night of May 4, 2024, you need to understand who Vincent really was. Not the polished banker who managed portfolios and attended charity galas. Not the twice-divorced romantic who claimed to want traditional love. The real Vincent, the one his ex-wives back in Singapore had tried to warn people about. The one who had been watching Tala for months before Derek ever contacted him. Vincent's first wife, Catherine, had testified during their divorce proceedings in Singapore about the surveillance. Cameras hidden in light fixtures, tracking software on her phone. A private investigator who followed her to yoga class and reported back on who she spoke to. Catherine had thought it was jealousy at first, even found it flattering in a twisted way. Then she realized it wasn't about protecting what he loved. It was about controlling what he owned. I was never his wife, Catherine told the marriage counselor during their final session. I was his property. He didn't love me. He inventoried me. His second wife, Mei Lin, experienced something different but equally disturbing. Vincent didn't surveil her. Instead, he suffocated her with presence. He needed to know where she was every moment. He called constantly. He showed up unannounced. He monitored her friendships, her family relationships, her hobbies. Anything that took her attention away from him became a threat to be eliminated. When Mei Lin had the affair, it wasn't about love or attraction. It was about oxygen. It was the only way she could breathe. The thing about Vincent, Mei Lin said in her victim impact statement years later, is that he doesn't see women as people. He sees us as things he's earned, rewards for his success. When we don't perform the way he expects, when we show independence or autonomy, something breaks in him, something dangerous. Both women had escaped, but both had seen something in Vincent's eyes during their final confrontations that haunted them. Not rage, not sadness, calculation, the cold assessment of a man deciding whether destroying them was worth the effort. Neither of them had been worth it. Vincent had let them go, content to destroy their reputations through strategic social manipulation rather than anything more direct. But Tala was different. Tala had given Vincent something his wives never had. She had given him perfection. Maria, the persona Tala created for him, was everything he'd ever wanted. Modest, submissive, devoted, dependent. Maria never challenged him. Maria never questioned him. Maria made him feel like the powerful patriarch he believed himself to be. For 5 months, Vincent experienced what he considered true love for the first time in his life. The fact that it was manufactured, that Maria was a character performed by a desperate young woman, didn't diminish its impact on his psychology. If anything, it intensified it. Because when Vincent discovered the deception, he didn't just feel betrayed. He felt robbed. Someone had stolen his perfect woman. Someone had taken the only relationship that had ever made him happy and revealed it to be a lie. And that someone was Tala Reyes. But here's the detail that separates Vincent's obsession from ordinary heartbreak. He didn't discover Tala's deception through Derek's investigation. He already knew. The private investigator Vincent hired hadn't been searching for evidence of infidelity. Vincent had hired him in January, barely a month into his relationship with Maria, as a matter of routine. He investigated everyone who got close to him. The investigator's report, delivered in February 2024, contained everything. Tala's real name, her student status, her family's financial difficulties, her other 2 relationships. Vincent had known about Derek and James for 3 months before he received Derek's phone call. So why didn't he confront her? Why did he continue the relationship, continue giving her money, continue planning a future with a woman he knew was deceiving him? Because Vincent didn't want to end the deception. He wanted to end the competition. In his mind, Tala's crime wasn't that she had lied to him. Her crime was that she had given pieces of herself to other men. The intellectual conversations she shared with James. The physical intimacy she gave to Derek. These were things that belonged to Vincent. She had stolen from him by distributing her attention to others. The confrontation on May 4th wasn't about justice or money. It was about elimination. Vincent needed Derek and James present to legitimize what he was planning. 2 witnesses who would confirm that Tala was a criminal, a con artist, someone who deserved whatever fate befell her. Their proposed indentured servitude arrangement was never meant to be implemented. It was theater designed to establish motive for someone else. If Tala had agreed to the arrangement, Vincent would have found another way. An accident, perhaps. A suicide that no one would question given the pressure she was under. He had contingencies for every outcome. But Tala hadn't agreed. She had started packing. She was going to run. And Vincent couldn't allow his possession to escape. At 11:42 p.m. on May 4, 2024, Vincent Tan used a key he'd copied months earlier to enter Tala's apartment. The key had been made from an impression taken during one of Maria's visits to his penthouse, when she'd left her bag unattended while using the bathroom. Vincent had a copy made the next day, just in case. Tala was in her bedroom when she heard the lock turn. She emerged to find Vincent standing in her living room, backlit by the lights of Marina District, looking at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, hunger, going somewhere. Maria? My name is Tala. She hated how small her voice sounded. Your name is whatever I decide it is. You became Maria for me. You can stay Maria forever. In the apartment I've prepared. With the life I've designed for you. The apartment I've prepared. The words sent ice through Tala's veins. What apartment? Vincent smiled. The building we're standing in, Tala. I own Unit 2312. For floors down. I've been furnishing it for months. Your favorite books on the shelves. Your preferred tea in the kitchen. Photos of us on the walls. Everything ready for you to move in. Tala's mind raced. He'd known where she lived. He'd been watching her. He'd been preparing a place for her like a cage for a bird he intended to capture. The contract from earlier tonight, Vincent continued, stepping closer. That was for Derek and James. They think this is about money. They think this is about punishment. But you know what this is really about, don't you, Maria? This is about us finally being together. Properly. Permanently. There is no us, Vincent. I'm not Maria. I was never Maria. Maria was a character I played to get money for my father's treatment. None of it was real. Vincent's smile didn't waver. But it will be. Given enough time. Given enough training. You'll become Maria genuinely. You'll forget Tala ever existed. You'll forget Derek and James. You'll forget everything except being exactly what I need you to be. The casual certainty in his voice was more terrifying than any threat. He wasn't speaking hypothetically. He was describing a plan he'd already committed to, a future he'd already designed. And if I refuse, then I go to the police. You go to prison. Your father dies. Your brother dies. Everything you've sacrificed becomes meaningless. Vincent tilted his head slightly, studying her reaction. But I don't think you'll refuse. I think you're a survivor, Tala. I think you'll adapt. You always adapt. That's what I love about you. Tala backed away until she hit the wall. Her apartment, which had felt small before, now felt like a coffin. There was no escape. Vincent stood between her and the door. The windows were sealed. Her phone was in the bedroom, too far to reach. I'll scream. The building has security. The building has security that I've been paying to ignore my visits for months. Vincent's voice was patient, almost kind. Do you think this is the first time I've been in your apartment when you weren't here? I've watched you sleep, Tala. I've gone through your things. I've read your diary. I know about the guilt you feel for your mother's death. I know about the dreams where you drown. I know everything about you. The violation of it. The months of surveillance she'd never detected. The intimacy of her private thoughts exposed to this man who stood before her with ownership in his eyes. You're insane. The words came out before she could stop them. Something flickered in Vincent's expression. A crack in the composure. I'm in love. There's a difference. No. Tala's voice grew stronger despite her fear. Love doesn't look like this. Love doesn't stalk. Love doesn't trap. Love doesn't prepare cages. What you feel isn't love, Vincent. It's collection. I'm not a person to you. I'm an acquisition, and I refuse to be acquired. She moved suddenly, darting toward the bedroom where her phone waited. If she could reach it, if she could call anyone, if she could get help. She made it 3 steps before Vincent caught her. His hand closed around her arm with a strength that surprised her. He was 52 years old, but he worked out daily, maintained his body with the same discipline he applied to his portfolio. He spun her around and slammed her against the wall hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. I gave you a choice. His face was inches from hers now, the mask of civility finally crumbling. I offered you comfort, security, a life most women would kill for. All you had to do was accept it. I'd rather die. The words hung in the air between them. Tala hadn't meant them. They were bravado, defiance, the desperate courage of someone with no options left. But Vincent heard them differently. If you're not going to be mine, Vincent said slowly, then you're not going to be anyone's. His hands closed around her throat. Forensic experts would later reconstruct the attack from physical evidence. The struggle lasted approximately 3 minutes. Tala fought with everything she had. She scratched. She kicked. She bit. DNA recovered from under her fingernails would provide crucial evidence. Defensive wounds on her forearms showed she'd tried to break his grip. A lamp was knocked over. A glass shattered. But Vincent was larger, stronger, and had the advantage of surprise and position. His hands maintained their pressure on her windpipe, cutting off oxygen to her brain, collapsing the structures of her throat. Tala's struggles grew weaker. Her vision dimmed. Her hands, which had been clawing at his arms, fell to her sides. The last thing she saw was Vincent's face. The concentration, the focus, the expression of a man completing a task he'd been preparing for longer than she could have imagined. Tala Marie Reyes died at approximately 11:58 p.m. on May 4, 2024. She was 23 years old. Her father's transplant was scheduled for the following month. Her nursing school graduation was 7 weeks away. Her entire life had been a series of sacrifices for people she loved, and in the end, that love couldn't save her. Vincent held her body for several minutes after she stopped breathing. Then he lowered her gently to the floor, arranged her limbs with unsettling care, and stood. The apartment was quiet. The city lights continued to glitter through the window. Somewhere in the Philippines, an old man with failing kidneys was sleeping, unaware that the daughter he'd raised had just been murdered. Vincent washed his hands in the kitchen sink. He checked his reflection in the bathroom mirror. He picked up his briefcase, stepped over Tala's body, and left the apartment at 12:15 a.m. He drove to the marina and threw the copied key into the water. He returned home, showered, and climbed into bed. He slept soundly for the first time in weeks. He believed he had committed the perfect crime. A woman known to be a con artist, found dead in her apartment, with 3 men who had motive to kill her. The investigation would chase its tail for months. The case would go cold, and Vincent would continue his life, perhaps finding a new Maria somewhere, someone he could mold more successfully this time. He was wrong about everything. James Lim couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation in Tala's apartment over and over. The look in her eyes when she'd explained her desperation. The crack in her voice when she'd said trusting people gets you killed. The way she'd looked at him, specifically him, when she admitted that his version of her had been the closest to real. He'd sent her 3 messages since leaving her apartment. No response. At 2 a.m., he told himself she was sleeping. At 4 a.m., he told himself she was thinking. At 6 a.m., he told himself she was angry with him. At 8 a.m., he called Derek. "Have you heard from her?" Derek's voice was groggy, annoyed at the early call. "No. Why would I? We said everything that needed to be said last night. Something feels wrong." James couldn't explain the dread that had been building in his chest. She should have responded by now, even to tell me to leave her alone. She's probably planning her escape. Derek yawned audibly. "Running back to the Philippines before we can go to the police. Honestly, good riddance." But James couldn't shake the feeling. At 10 a.m., he tried calling Tala's number directly. It rang to voicemail. At noon, he sent another message. Nothing. At 2 p.m., he made a decision. He contacted building management at her tower in Marina District and requested a welfare check. The security guard who opened the door at 2:15 p.m. would later testify that he'd seen many things in his 20 years of service, but nothing that prepared him for what he found inside Unit 2847. Tala's body lay on the living room floor, positioned almost peacefully, as if she'd simply decided to lie down and never get up. The bruising around her throat told a different story. The overturned lamp and broken glass told the rest. The investigation moved quickly. Within hours, Dubai police had identified 3 persons of interest: Vincent Tan, Derek Chen, James Lim. All 3 were Singaporean nationals. All 3 had been at the victim's apartment the previous evening. All 3 had documented grievances against her. All 3 had means, motive, and opportunity. Detective Inspector Amir Hassan, a 30-year veteran of Dubai's homicide division, was assigned to the case. He'd built his career on reading people, on understanding the psychology behind violence. Within the first 24 hours, he developed a theory he couldn't prove. The group chat was the first piece of evidence recovered from Derek's phone. The 3 men had documented their discovery of Tala's deception, their plan to confront her, and their proposed arrangement for repayment. All 3 admitted to being at her apartment on May 4th. All 3 claimed they'd left her alive. Derek Chen's alibi was solid. Building security footage showed him leaving at 8:47 p.m. and entering his own apartment in Beachfront neighborhood at 9:23 p.m. His doorbell camera confirmed he didn't leave again until the following morning. James Lim had left at 10:15 p.m., also captured on security footage. His building's elevator logs showed him arriving home at 10:52 p.m. and not leaving until he went to work the next morning. Vincent Tan presented a different timeline. He claimed he'd left at 8:45 p.m., immediately after Derek. But building footage showed him exiting at 8:51 p.m., 6 minutes after he claimed. The discrepancy was small but significant. More significantly, Vincent's building didn't have entrance logs for that night. A power fluctuation, the building manager explained, had corrupted several hours of data. Convenient timing for a man who claimed to have gone straight home. The breakthrough came from digital forensics. When investigators examined Vincent's personal devices, they found something unexpected. A private server containing months of surveillance data. Photos of Tala taken without her knowledge. Screenshots of her text conversations, obtained through spyware installed on one of the phones he'd given her. Location tracking data showing her movements for the past 4 months. And most damning of all, floor plans of an apartment in her building that didn't belong to him. Unit 2312, 4 floors below Tala's apartment. Investigators obtained a warrant and entered the unit on May 8. What they found confirmed every suspicion. The apartment had been decorated for Tala. Her favorite books lined the shelves, titles Vincent had learned from his surveillance. Her preferred brand of tea sat in the kitchen cabinet. The bedroom closet contained clothing in her size, styles similar to what Maria would wear, and covering every wall of the living room were photographs. Tala entering her building, Tala at the university, Tala at restaurants with Derek, with James, with Vincent himself. Hundreds of images documenting an obsession that had been building for months. In the bedroom, investigators found a journal. Vincent's handwriting, meticulous and controlled, detailed his plans in clinical language. January 15th, subject displays perfect submissive tendencies. Recommend continued investment. January 28th, subject's financial desperation makes her controllable. Increased dependency through larger gifts. February 12th, investigator confirms subject is engaged with multiple partners. This is unacceptable. Begin planning intervention. March 3rd, Unit 2312 preparation complete. Subject will be relocated following elimination of competitors. The journal continued through April, documenting Vincent's growing frustration with Derek and James's continued presence in Tala's life. The final entry was dated May 3rd, the day before the murder. May 3rd, tomorrow the others will confront her. She will see the futility of resistance. If she accepts the arrangement, I will separate her from them gradually. If she refuses, alternative measures will be necessary. Either way, she will be mine. Vincent Tan was arrested on May 10, 2024, at his office in Dubai. He was escorted out in handcuffs. Past colleagues who had known him for years, past clients whose money he'd managed with such careful precision. He maintained his composure throughout, answering questions with the same polished professionalism he brought to everything. His composure cracked only once, during his formal interrogation, when Detective Hassan placed a photograph on the table. It was a still from the building's parking garage camera, time-stamped 11:42 p.m. on May 4th. It showed a figure in a baseball cap, face angled away from the camera, using a key card to access the elevator. That key card was registered to you, Mr. Tan. Detective Hassan's voice was calm. You told us you'd lost it weeks ago, but the access logs show it was used that night, to enter the building, to access the elevator, to go to the floor where Tala Reyes died. Vincent said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, I want my lawyer. The trial of Vincent Tan Wei Leong began on September 15, 2024, and lasted 5 months. It became the most publicized murder case in Dubai's recent history, attracting international media attention and sparking debates about obsession, surveillance, and the psychology of control. Singapore's media covered it extensively, fascinated by the case of 3 of their nationals entangled in a web of deception and murder. The prosecution, led by a senior Dubai prosecutor, built a case on physical evidence, digital forensics, and psychological analysis. The DNA under Tala's fingernails matched Vincent's. The surveillance apparatus proved premeditation. The prepared apartment demonstrated the depth of his obsession. The journal documented his intent. She was never a person to him, the prosecutor said in her closing argument. She was an object, a possession he believed he had earned. And when she refused to be possessed, when she asserted her humanity, he destroyed her. Not in rage, not in passion, in cold, calculated elimination of property he could no longer control. The defense attempted multiple strategies. They argued that Vincent had been victimized by a sophisticated con artist. They suggested that Derek or James could have committed the murder. They claimed the surveillance was protective rather than predatory. None of it worked. The court found Vincent Tan guilty on charges of premeditated murder, stalking, criminal surveillance, and breaking and entering. The judge delivered the sentence on February 14, 2025, Valentine's Day, a coincidence that news commentators couldn't resist highlighting. Vincent Tan, you have been found guilty of the premeditated murder of Tala Marie Reyes. The judge's voice carried the weight of his office and his personal revulsion. The evidence presented demonstrates not a crime of passion but a calculated act of elimination by a man who viewed women as objects to be controlled. Your meticulous planning, your months of surveillance, your preparation of what can only be described as a holding cell, all speak to a psychology that poses ongoing danger to society. He sentenced him to life imprisonment. Vincent's only statement came after the sentence was pronounced. He stood, adjusted his suit jacket, and spoke directly to the court. She was mine. His voice was calm, almost reasonable. She was always supposed to be mine. I simply took what belonged to me. History will understand, even if you don't. He was escorted from the courtroom to begin a sentence he would never complete. 3 years later, Vincent Tan would die in prison from a heart attack, alone in his cell, clutching a photograph of Maria that he'd somehow managed to keep hidden from guards. Derek Chunjin Wei testified for the prosecution in exchange for immunity on any fraud-related charges. His testimony detailed the group chat, the confrontation, and Vincent's unsettling composure throughout the evening. He described the moment Vincent placed the spreadsheet on the table, the way he'd smiled while discussing Tala's options. Looking back, Derek told the court, I realized Vincent was the only one who wasn't surprised. James and I were angry, hurt, devastated. Vincent was performing. He already knew exactly how the night would end. After the trial, Derek returned to Singapore. He deleted his social media accounts, sold his cryptocurrency holdings, and disappeared from public life. Friends who tried to contact him received no response. The man who had built his identity on visibility chose to become invisible. James Lim Kai Jun's testimony was the most emotionally devastating of the trial. He described his relationship with Tala, the conversations they'd shared, the connection he believed was real. He described leaving her apartment on May 4th, the guilt he felt for participating in the confrontation, the messages he'd sent that went unanswered. I keep thinking about what I could have done differently, James said, his voice breaking. If I'd stayed. If I'd insisted on talking more. If I'd told Derek and Vincent that I wouldn't participate in their arrangement. Maybe she'd still be alive. Maybe I could have protected her. What would you want people to know about Tala Reyes? The prosecutor asked. James was silent for a long moment. That she was more than what she did. She was a daughter trying to save her father. She was a sister trying to protect her brother. She made terrible choices, but she made them for reasons most people can't understand. She wasn't a villain. She was desperate. And desperation makes people do things they'd never do otherwise. After the trial, James resigned from his architecture firm. He couldn't concentrate on designing buildings when all he could think about was the woman who'd told him that buildings tell stories. He returned to Singapore and took a position with a non-profit organization that provided housing for domestic violence survivors, a choice that surprised no one who had watched his testimony. He never dated again. Not seriously. Friends who tried to set him up received polite refusals. I loved someone who didn't exist, he explained once, at a dinner party where wine had loosened his tongue. How do you trust your judgment after that? How do you believe anyone is who they say they are? Roberto Reyes learned of his daughter's death on May 7, 2024, when investigators contacted him to confirm her identity. He was in the dialysis clinic when the call came, hooked up to the machine that had been keeping him alive for months, paid for by money his daughter had obtained through means he couldn't imagine. The old fisherman who had survived typhoons and poverty and the death of his wife collapsed in the clinic. The nurses had to sedate him. When he woke, he asked them to let him die. Without Tala, he said, there was nothing left worth living for. But Roberto Reyes didn't die. The story of Tala's murder, once it became international news, sparked something unexpected. A crowdfunding campaign organized by her nursing school classmates raised over $300,000 in 2 weeks. Donors from around the world contributed, moved by the story of a young woman who had sacrificed everything for her family. The money paid for Roberto's kidney transplant, which took place in August 2024, performed by one of the best surgeons in Manila. Roberto survived, but survival isn't the same as living. He learned the truth about his daughter's scheme from journalists who showed up at his door, Eager for interviews, he learned about Maria and Bella and Tala. He learned about the 3 Singaporean men. He learned about the money flows, the deceptions, the elaborate performances his daughter had staged to keep him breathing. The shame isn't hers, Roberto said, in the only interview he ever gave. The shame is mine. I couldn't provide for my family. I couldn't protect my children. My daughter became something she never wanted to be because her father was too weak to take care of himself. That's on me. Not her. Never her. Roberto Reyes still lives in his village. He tends his wife's grave every morning and his daughter's grave every evening. Tala was buried next to Elena, in the same cemetery where generations of their family had been laid to rest. The headstone reads, "Beloved daughter and sister. She carried burdens no one should carry alone." Marco Reyes, Tala's brother, experienced a different kind of aftermath. When news of the murder broke, the loan sharks who had been threatening the family suddenly became very quiet. The publicity made their business model dangerous. The last thing they wanted was journalists investigating their operations. Marco's debt was forgiven, not out of kindness but out of self-preservation. The loan sharks sent him a message through an intermediary, "We're even. Don't ever speak about us." Marco entered treatment for his gambling addiction 6 months after his sister's death. He works as a construction supervisor now, building houses for families like the one he grew up in. He visits Tala's grave every Sunday, bringing flowers and prayers and the guilt he'll carry until his own death. "I killed her," Marco told his sponsor during one of their sessions. "Not directly. But if I hadn't been so stupid, if I hadn't gambled away money we didn't have, she never would have been in that position. She died because I was weak." His sponsor, a former addict himself, gave the only response that made sense. "Then live your life in a way that honors her sacrifice. Be the person she believed you could become." The legal aftermath of Tala's case extended beyond Vincent's conviction. The UAE passed new regulations on digital surveillance, inspired by the evidence of Vincent's stalking apparatus. The new law criminalized the use of spyware on intimate partners, established mandatory reporting requirements for private investigators who discover evidence of stalking, and created a victims fund for survivors of obsessive surveillance. The dating industry also faced scrutiny. The platform where Vincent and Tala had met implemented new verification requirements and psychological screening protocol. Similar services worldwide followed suit, though critics argued that these measures were more about public relations than actual safety. Academics studied the case extensively. A forensic psychologist who consulted for the prosecution published a paper that became required reading in criminal psychology programs. "Vincent Tan represents a particular type of dangerous individual," the paper stated. "Outwardly successful, socially competent, capable of maintaining a facade of normalcy for decades. But beneath that facade lies a fundamental inability to view others as autonomous beings. Women, in particular, are seen as extensions of himself, objects to be acquired and controlled. When control becomes impossible, elimination becomes logical. Not emotional, logical. That's what makes individuals like Vincent so dangerous. They don't kill in rage. They kill in calculation." But perhaps the most profound impact of Tala's case was the conversation it sparked about desperation, exploitation, and the systems that force people into impossible choices. Why was a 23-year-old nursing student forced to choose between her father's death and becoming a con artist? A journalist wrote in a widely shared essay, "What kind of society creates conditions where deception becomes the only path to survival?" Tala Reyes made terrible choices, but she made them within a system that offered her no good options. Her crimes were real, but so was the desperation that created them. Until we address the systems that manufacture such desperation, there will be more Talas, and more victims of Talas, and more tragedies that could have been prevented. The nursing school where Tala had studied established a scholarship in her name. The fund provides full financial support to students from developing countries whose families face medical emergencies. It has helped 17 students since its establishment. 17 families who didn't have to choose between education and survival. This is a story without heroes. Tala Reyes was not innocent. She deceived 3 men out of $150,000 through calculated emotional manipulation. She created fictional personas designed to exploit specific psychological vulnerabilities. She was a con artist, a fraud, and a criminal. Vincent Tan was a murderer who disguised obsession as love and control as devotion. He spent months preparing to cage a woman who had never belonged to him, and when that cage proved impossible, he chose destruction over acceptance. Derek Chun and James Lim were victims of fraud who briefly considered becoming perpetrators of something nearly as dark. Their proposed indentured servitude arrangement was exploitation dressed in the language of justice. But perhaps the real villain of this story isn't any single person. It's the systems that create impossible choices. The healthcare that costs more than families can afford. The debt that compounds faster than wages can grow. The desperation that makes good people do terrible things. Tala Reyes was 23 years old. She wanted to save her father and protect her brother. She created 3 different versions of herself to survive, and in the end, she lost all of them. The men she deceived are forever changed. Vincent died in prison, still convinced he was the victim. Derek lives in self-imposed exile in Singapore, unable to trust his own judgment. James builds houses for abuse survivors, trying to create something good from his proximity to tragedy. And somewhere in the Philippines, an old man tends his daughter's grave, wondering if there was anything he could have done differently. Any choice that wouldn't have led here. Any version of this story where his daughter came home. There isn't one. There never was. The girl with 3 faces is gone. What remains is a cautionary tale about desperation and obsession, about the lies we tell to survive, and the truths that destroy us when they finally emerge. If you take anything from this story, let it be this: the people who know your secrets are the people who can destroy you with them. But sometimes, the most dangerous person isn't the one you've deceived. It's the one who decides that if they can't have you, no one will. Tala Reyes learned that lesson too late. May she finally rest in peace.